The third year of the Formula One sprint races is now wrapped up, but it's still a highly controversial format, and as such, changes and adjustments will surely be coming in 2024. The format has been tinkered with over the intervening time, but the critics, both F1 teams and fans alike, aren't quieting down, and bigger, more comprehensive changes will surely be required. Or, to the delight of many, they could just drop the format entirely, with drivers and team leaders, including top dogs Verstappen and Horner, never missing a moment to express their dislike of the event at every opportunity. Could this be the final nail in the coffin for the sprint races? Well, news is that change is coming for the 2024 season, with talks between teams and F1 management about rearranging the scheduling and ordering of the weekends to ease the parc fermé regulations, potentially allowing the teams to make adjustments to the car setups after the sprint. Currently, setups are pretty much locked in once Friday qualifying begins. The proposals being discussed are to put the sprint race on the Saturday morning to allow time between the end of the sprint and the Saturday afternoon qualifying for any final adjustments. And while I'm not certain if this change is enough to quell the criticism from fans and teams who are simply opposed to the sprint concept as a whole, it should at the very least make for a more interesting race on the Sunday, which is after all the main event. A major complaint has been that the way the sprint race is currently done is that it takes away the suspense from the Sunday GP, as what you get in the sprint is a big old boring predictor of what lies ahead the next day. But intra-race setup changes would hopefully allow for more spice on the Sunday, allowing teams to fix any errors on the Saturday and in doing so make the Sunday more competitive. Now, Verstappen has never been shy of voicing his displeasure of the sprint race in its entirety, saying, "We should just get rid of the sprint weekend, and then everyone can just set up their cars normally. Why do we need to try and invent something? I think our product works if you just make sure that the cars are competitive, and the rules will stay the same for a long time," said Verstappen. "Why are we always inventing new things? It almost sounds out of like craziness that, we need to come up with something. In football, they don't change the rules, or in other sports. It's been like that for 100 years. Why do we suddenly need to come up with other things to try and make it entertaining? I think if you have a good race on your hands with cars being close to each other, then you don't need a sprint format or weekend." And Verstappen isn't the only driver to be vocal about the sprints. Carlos Sainz has said that the sprints give away too much of what's to come on the Sunday, which has been a popular complaint amongst fans as well. Sainz has said the setup doesn't increase the overall entertainment value and that nothing should distract from the Grand Prix itself. Now, it's not always the case that drivers and fans agree on changes and current formats. After all, the drivers are invested in the sport in a very different way to the fans. The drivers are, of course, passionate about the sport themselves, but they're competitors and they'll campaign for things that ultimately benefit their unique positions on the track. So when both groups, fans and drivers alike, are starting to loudly agree, changes definitely need to be made, or else F1 starts to look completely out of touch. Nevertheless, there's nothing from Stefano Domenicali or any words from anyone near the top that the sprint races will be leaving. They're very much presenting a united front on them, so for the near to medium future, it looks like changes to the sprint concept as opposed to scrapping it entirely are the best its detractors can hope for. Now, the intention of the sprint races is to boost viewership, but also to generate competition between the various venues and tracks who are competing to host them. Ultimately, it's all down to money. Who knew F1 was so money-oriented, eh? Nevertheless, as quiet as Domenicali has been in regard to scrapping the sprint race, word is coming from his camp that they are working hard to improve it. And Sergio Perez has added his opinion to the mix, advocating for reversed grids, saying, "I would propose a reverse grid or something like that to make it more interesting for the fans, because I don't think it's working what we want to achieve. I think it will mix things up. It would create more opportunities, a lot more overtaking. If we want to keep this format, give it a go on something quite different." The suggestion of introducing reverse grid races is not new for F1, but it is rare to see a driver advocating for what would be one of the biggest rule changes in the history of the championship. Formula 2, seen as F1's baby brother and the final stepping stone a driver takes before F1, does utilize the regulation by swapping the top 10 around in qualifying for their sprint race, and Formula 3 does it as well but accommodates for the larger grid by swapping the top 12. But Formula 2 and Formula 3 to one side, this is F1 after all, a whole different beast. Would the concept of a reverse grid be sensible? Well, it would surely make for more racing and competition, but does that equal better racing? Simple flybys on a DRS straight simply don't cut it for excitement levels, but each track has its own characteristics on how it produces battles. Brazil was a great example of how having two separate DRS detection points for straights close together can do wonders for keeping a recently overtaken car in play. And so reverse grids could help some of the slower teams stay in contention, and following on from that, reverse grids would likely play a huge role in deciding the Constructors' Championship at the lower end of the grid. For a team like Williams, being at the front of the field and having the chance to score 10 points would be huge. With a Haas also in the mix, it too would have a chance to steal points that would otherwise be a huge task and most likely require a lot of mistakes from the top teams to secure in a Grand Prix setting. And so in the sprint, not only would there be an exciting fight for pole position, but there would be a heightened battle for the midfield teams to get into that top 10 and give themselves a greater chance for the remainder of the weekend. And so it's no surprise that some of the smaller teams have voiced their support for this setup. Even if the points on offer are much smaller in the sprint, it does allow them to compete in a more realistic manner with the top dogs. Although it could be said that they would only be attaining those possible points because the best have been so heavily handicapped. So ultimately, is the concept of a reverse grid a sporting concept? But if the reverse grids prove to be too divisive, then another option could be to return to one-shot qualifying, a format that was used back in the 2003 to 2005 seasons, where each driver had the track to themselves and just one make-or-break opportunity to set a time that would determine the grid. Now, given that the final part of sprint qualifying already limits drivers to a single set of soft tires, it's basically operating as a one-chance format, so formalizing this approach could help the smaller teams. So it seems there are options for F1 to play around with. However, it's worth remembering that you can't please all the people all the time, and with that in mind, only time will tell what F1 has in store for next season's sprints. What do you think? Should the sprints be scrapped entirely, or if they stay, what adjustments would you like to see? After all, pleasing the fans is the best way to grow the sport, and in doing so, the money on offer. Let us know in the comments.